Hi, sixth graders. This is Mrs. Gall. Today we're going to talk about circle graphs. Get your notebook open to a fresh page and get this title at the top. Press play when you're ready to continue. Some things to note about circle graphs is circle graphs compare part to part or part to whole. Data is given per 100, so we're thinking about 100% of our graph being the entire graph. Here's an example of a circle graph. This is the American League wins from 2016. You'll notice if you were to add up all of the percents, it would total 100%. And then this one, if you look at each individual section, it tells us what that represents. So this is how many had 68 wins, and it looks like that was 6.7%. You'll notice that this graph has a lot of things that a typical graph does, like a title. You'll also see that label that tells us what that data point represents. So here, this one represents 89, and then the percent that that data point is occurring in our data, which in this case, 89 occurred more than some of the others. It occurred 13.3%. All of your percentages should add up to 100. If you were to create a circle graph, let's look at this National League data, the number of wins here. First thing you would need to do is find the percentage for each data point. And be sure that your percents add all the way up to 100%. So you don't actually have to do this for the assessment, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time going over this process, but the way that you get the percentage is you count the total number of data points you have. In this case, it's 15. And then you count how many of each data point you have. So if I'm looking at 68, I have 1, 2, 3 68s. So then I would take 3 and divide that by, 3 is the number of times 68 occurred, divide that by my total 15, and I get my percent, which is 0.2, so that would be 20% for my 68. Okay, so 68 occurs 20% of the time. Then I take 69, it occurs 1 time, so I'm going to take 1, divide that by 15, I get 0.0666 repeating. If I times that by 100, my 69 occurs about 6.7%. And the thing that you really want to be careful of here as you're finding your different percentages is you really want to make sure your percents total 100. So you want to be aware of that as you're moving forward, making sure those totals all equal 100. Once you have a percent for each data point, you trace a large circle, and you would want to use a circle graph template to help you draw the appropriate size sections that represent the percentage accurately. You wouldn't just want to eyeball 20% or eyeball 6.7%. You'd then want to label each section so that your viewer knows what they're looking at. What would a circle graph for this National League look like? What do you think? Well, the 68s would take up about a fifth of it at 20%, and then most of the other data points are only in here one time with the exception of 87. So the rest of your graph would all have that 6.7%, kind of these smaller sections, with that exception being our 87 would be twice that size. Here's our American League wins from 2016. So this is opposite of the National League that we were just looking at. This is from American League wins. What would the mode be? Can you find the mode? Yeah, you actually can find the mode. It's your section that's the largest. In this case, we have 3 sections that are all larger than the rest, and they're the same size. So 89, 86, and 84 all have that same percentage of 13.3, which is more than the rest. That means all of those data points occur the same amount of time. So those would be our 3 modes in this data set. Which other landmarks, if any, can be found by reading the circle graph? It's kind of challenging. It would take a lot of work to figure out. You don't know exactly the number of data points, so you really can't write this data out in order from least to greatest, you'd have to kind of guess how many of each of these fall in your data set. So it's really challenging to figure out the mean, the median. You can find the maximum and minimum. That would be your smallest number and your largest number, which also allows you to find your range. But the mean and median would be much more challenging to figure out. If the data was based off of 100 teams, how many teams won 84 games? Let's look for 84. The percent, if we're comparing this to 100 people, it's about 13 teams. Now, of course, it's a little bit over 13, but we don't want to round up there. We want to round down. We could say 13.3 teams, but it's safer to say round down to 13 teams there. If the data was based off 100 teams, how many teams won 95 games? If I find 95 on my graph, I see that about 6.7 teams, I'm going to round down there and say about 6 teams. I'm not going to round up because it didn't fully get to 7, so I can't say it's 7 teams if it didn't fully get there, so that's why it's safer to round down. Is the circle graph the best way to display this data? Most of the sections are about the same size, so I don't think this is probably the best way to display this data. I think there would be other ways that would be more helpful, especially since a lot of the data points were only there one time, and so we're seeing really small sections there. Let's look at two different types of graphs. So we're looking at the American League and the National League, and let's compare here. How did the percentage of teams that won 68 games change from the American to the National League? Let's identify where those 68 would be. So in the American League, we had a 6.7%, a pretty small percent, likely one team. And then in the National League, 68 was 20%. If we remember that data, that was quite a few data points there. So we had an increase. It tripled a little, maybe even more than that. I'd have to check what 6.7 times 3 is, but about tripled from American League to National League. How did the percentage of teams that won 86 games change from the American League to the National League? Let's identify where 86 would be in both sets here. So in 2000 American League, we had 86 was 13.3%, and in National League, 86 was about half of that, 6.7%. So it decreased by about half. And how did the percentage of teams that won 95 games change? Let's find 95 on both graphs. We had 6.7% from American League and 6.7% in the National League, so that stayed the same for both leagues. Some pros and cons to circle graphs. Some pros, we can see individual data points. It helps us compare the data. Cons, it's pretty difficult to make these. There's just a lot of steps to the process. All right, you guys, that's all I have for you today. Make sure you check in with your teacher if you have any questions.